It's 9 o'clock over one of the world's most spectacular reefs. 5 divers prepare for the day's first dive. Excitement rises. It will be a deep dive. This will be Patrick and Sandy's first descent below 60 feet 18 meters. It's a training dive, the best way to learn to deep dive, and they discuss it with their PADI instructor, Richard, who is qualified to teach deep recreational diving. Ken and Alice are certified PADI advanced open water divers and PADI deep divers. Ken enjoys studying aquatic life. He hopes to find a type of black coral which isn't found at shallower depths. Alice's passion for underwater photography goes well with Ken's interests. She'll photograph what they find together. Each diver has a reasonable dive objective planned, and each has a safe dive planned. No one is here to get a thrill by diving below safe depths. Each knows that deep diving can be exciting and rewarding, but it also calls for proper deep diving equipment and procedures for safety. The dive planning, preparation, and execution this group follows typify suitable recreational deep diving procedures. They began with a proper dive plan. For this dive, they plan a 100 feet 30 meters depth limit. This is less than the maximum recreational limit of 130 feet 40 meters. However, their no decompression time will be longer at 100 feet 30 meters, and they'll be more light. For these reasons, many divers consider 100 feet 30 meters a useful optimum depth limit for general deep diving. Military, technical, and commercial divers dive below 130 feet 40 meters, but the equipment and training necessary to do so safely differs significantly from recreational training and equipment. Under other circumstances, the group's depth limit might have been shallower than even 100 feet 30 meters. Depth limits must be personalized to account for many variables. Less ideal diving conditions like cold water or poor visibility, a less experienced buddy, lack of emergency help in the immediate area, diving at altitude, and other variables are all reasons to set a shallower, personalized depth limit. The divers also plan time and air supply limits. They have dive computers and the Wheel Recreational Dive Planner. Conventional dive tables can be used for deep dives, but computers and the wheel allow multi-level diving. Multi-level diving maximizes bottom time by accounting for slower nitrogen absorption as the diver ascends to shallower depths. The plan calls for staying at least 5 minutes from the no decompression limits at all times. And they've planned to end the dive with enough air for a comfortable reserve and a 3-minute safety stop at 15 feet 5 meters. Each diver uses a balanced regulator that has been properly maintained and serviced annually by a professional dive center. This assures comfortable breathing at depth. Each selected his exposure suit based on being comfortable in the cooler deep water. Along with her dive computer, Sandy has a full set of gauges including compass, SPG, timer, and depth gauge. The timer and depth gauge back up her computer. Or she could use them with dive tables if her computer weren't available. She has gauge accuracy checked regularly by a PADI dive center. Patrick carries a light so he can look in crevices, and so he can see colors filtered out by the deep water. All the divers wear a 71.2 cubic foot 12-liter or larger tank to ensure adequate air for the deep dive. Richard has chosen an 80 cubic foot 11-liter tank. Some deep divers also use a pony bottle for an added safety margin. Deep diving also calls for a reference line for controlled descents and ascents. In this case, the mooring line. A wall or bottom can also be used as a reference. But experienced deep divers frequently descend without a line, conditions allowing. Preparation also includes emergency breathing equipment at 15 feet 5 meters. This assures adequate air for safety or emergency decompression stops. When there's no emergency breathing equipment available, deep dives must be made with extra caution and very conservatively. Before the dive, they made sure they were properly weighted for neutral buoyancy at the surface with a nearly empty tank. But they leave extra weights hanging with the emergency breathing equipment. These make safety stops easier if a diver is accidentally too buoyant at the end of the dive. When deep diving from shore or away from a boat, the reference line, breathing equipment, weights, dive tables, and a float can be consolidated into a surface support station. The divers are careful to maintain their orientation as they descend. Maintaining peak performance buoyancy, they adjust their BCDs regularly to control their descent and slowly arrive at the bottom neutrally buoyant. Moving away from the descent area, the divers take care to not touch or injure aquatic life or stir up the bottom and reduce visibility. They swim relaxed, breathing slowly and deeply, conserving air. This allows their regulators to deliver the dense air of a deep dive more efficiently. The divers avoid overexertion and heavy breathing, which could impair regulator performance at depth. Frequent checks of air and remaining no decompression time prevent low air or emergency decompression situations. In clear water near a vertical face, depth can be deceptive. The divers check their gauges to avoid accidentally exceeding their planned depth. Ken and Alice hover near the wall so they have a depth reference, but they're careful not to touch or damage the aquatic life that lives there. Ken keeps their bearings by navigating with his compass, just like on a shallower dive. But the divers don't go as far as they might with more no decompression time. While Ken and Alice take pictures, the rest of the divers have found a sandy ledge where they can kneel. As part of deep dive training, Richard times Sandy as she opens a combination lock. Earlier, he timed Sandy opening the same lock at the surface. The extra time it takes to do the task underwater shows them that nitrogen narcosis has affected their coordination and concentration to a small degree. Nitrogen narcosis is the intoxicating effect caused by breathing air at deep depths. As the diver goes deeper, nitrogen impairs the nervous system, slowing thinking and mental functions. Like other forms of intoxication, the effects of nitrogen narcosis vary. A diver may have slowed, inflexible thinking, evidenced by a short attention span, stupor, or loss of coordination. He may have short-term memory loss or experience a false sense of security, resulting in inappropriate behavior, such as failing to monitor depth, time, and air supply. Or he may feel anxious and uncomfortable. Nitrogen narcosis itself isn't harmful. The problem is that a diver strongly affected by it may act or react inappropriately to matters regarding safety. Its effects can be compounded by cold water or low visibility, which creates stress and slow reaction times further. Fortunately, its effects are usually minimal at 100 feet 30 meters and shallower depths. If a diver experiences nitrogen narcosis, ascent to a shallow depth relieves it. On other deep specialty dives, Patrick and Sandy will look at other aspects of deep diving, such as how pressure affects some common objects. This shows them how buoyancy and shape can change with depth. They'll see how depth affects light and color. And they'll observe that depth gauges or computers can vary slightly in the depths they read. The divers monitor their ascent with their computers and gauges, maintaining a 60 feet 18 meters per minute or slower rate. They use the line to control the ascent, and they release air periodically from their BCDs, which expands as they ascend. As safe divers, they slowly ascend from every dive. At 15 feet 5 meters, they pause for a 3-minute safety stop. A safety stop is recommended after any dive, but the recreational dive planner requires a safety stop for any dive to 100 feet 30 meters or deeper, if the dive comes within 3 pressure groups of a no decompression limit, or if any RDP limit is reached. During the stop, all divers double-check that they're within the no decompression limits. If it were found that emergency decompression is required, the diver would extend his safety stop to cover it. If he's low on air, which is likely when a no decompression limit is accidentally exceeded, the emergency breathing system assures that there's plenty of air to complete the stop. Ken and Alice make their ascent away from the anchor line. Ascents and descents with a line or other reference are generally preferred because they're easier to control, but there's no current and they have ample air for a safe ascent and safety stop, so it's reasonable in this case to surface without a reference. They watch their gauges and control their buoyancy, making sure they ascend no faster than 60 feet 18 meters per minute. At 15 feet 5 meters, they adjust for neutral buoyancy and make a 3-minute safety stop. As they maintain their depth and watch the time, they double-check that they're within the no decompression limits. As part of Patrick and Sandy's training, Richard reviews the first aid for someone who becomes unconscious after a dive or has signs or symptoms of decompression illness. These may include extreme fatigue, pain in the joints, back, or abdomen, dizziness, numbness, tingling, or paralysis. They may also include trouble breathing or any symptoms that lack an apparent cause. The appropriate steps would be to keep the patient lying down and put him on oxygen to accelerate the release of nitrogen. If necessary, give CPR and artificial respiration. The next step is to notify emergency medical assistance because the treatment for decompression illness usually requires recompression in a recompression chamber. If a diver may have decompression illness, he should never go back in the water to attempt recompression. Recompression treatment takes hours and includes important drug and oxygen therapy. Improper recompression would only make his condition worse. Of course, safe diving practices and diving conservatively make decompression illness highly unlikely. These divers have had a safe, exciting deep dive because they observed appropriate deep diving practices. Each had an appropriate deep diving objective, and they applied proper deep dive planning. Their plan included time, depth, and air supply limits suited to the environment and the divers. Each had the necessary deep diving equipment, including a balanced and properly maintained regulator, an exposure suit selected for the temperature at depth, and a dive computer or a timer and depth gauge. Each had a 71.2 cubic foot, 12-liter or larger tank to ensure adequate air for the dive. They had a reference line for their descent and ascent, and at 15 feet 5 meters, they left emergency breathing equipment and weights to ensure they could make a safety or emergency decompression stop. Deep diving techniques made their dive easier. They made controlled descents along the reference line, and at the bottom used relaxed swimming and slow, deep breathing to keep from impairing regulator performance. Frequent time and air checks kept them well within no decompression and air supply limits. At the end of the dive, they made controlled ascents at 60 feet, 18 meters per minute or slower, with a 3-minute safety stop at 15 feet 5 meters. The divers were prepared for possible problems. If nitrogen narcosis had become a problem, they would have ascended to a shallower depth. In case they needed to make an emergency decompression stop, they planned the dive so they could simply extend the safety stop to cover it. In the unlikely event that decompression illness were a problem after the dive, they were prepared to give emergency oxygen and contact medical assistance. Deep dives call for a bit more planning and care than shallow dives, but the extra effort opens the door to new dive sites and new adventures.